Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, just exactly why Jordan McLaughlin has been so important to the Timberwolves so far this season. Plus, some of the issues the Wolves are having, what they need to do, what the Wolves need to do to fix some of these ongoing issues as the schedule lightens up a little bit. The Wolves should be able to rack up a few more wins, but let's talk about how they can do that. Next up is the Indiana Pacers. We'll preview that matchup on Wednesday as well. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy Hump Day and happy Timberwolves game day. Also happy Thanksgiving Eve to those of you in the United States. First of all, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, Locked On Wolves is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch the show on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. This show, plus all the other great Locked On Minnesota shows, are available there. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at my account, which is at Beecken. That's with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right. So the Timberwolves take on the Pacers tonight. I want to preview that. It's a pretty interesting matchup. The Pacers are one of the, in my opinion, one of the league's more intriguing teams. We'll get to all that later, just based on the winning streak they're on, how they've been winning. Some of their best players are really intriguing. An exciting rookie in Mathurin. So lots to talk about the Pacers. I want to get to that later. First, let's focus on the Timberwolves. And I want to start with Jordan McLaughlin. He has been one of the fun stories of the first, month plus, first 5 weeks or so of the regular season for the Wolves. Kind of a cult hero in Minnesota, and has been really for the last couple of seasons. But we've gone beyond the part of this just being like a cute, fuzzy story about how J-Mac comes in and steadies the ship. Like, he's a vital part of the Wolves winning right now. He was a huge part of that Timberwolves win. Yes, a win that they should have had regardless, but I think maybe that's why this is magnified so much, is Jordan McLaughlin played such an important role in stabilizing the Wolves, not just stabilizing them, but helping them get over the hump, down double digits to an extremely short-handed Miami Heat team on Monday, down 13 at halftime, down by as many as 15. In the third quarter, the Wolves were teetering on the edge of unraveling, and Jordan McLaughlin was first one of the steadying hands to kind of right the ship for the Wolves within that third quarter. And then he was the one, along with Anthony Edwards, who, of course, was part of the reason the Wolves were in that spot, inattentive defense, issues on the offensive end, the complaining, the technical, etc. The Edwards block on Max Strus on the dunk attempt, and then he comes out and hits the step back. Jordan McLaughlin, though, is the one that hits that go-ahead three-pointer, or maybe McLaughlin's was the tie. I think McDaniels tied the game with the three, and McLaughlin put the Wolves ahead with the three-pointer shortly thereafter, after that flurry of Anthony Edwards. And it was almost kind of a microcosm of what Jordan McLaughlin has done for this team so far this season. Some of the advanced stats are we've talked a ton about them here, and I'm sure you've heard or read it elsewhere. Like, going back to last year, this isn't an advanced stat, but like last year, the crazy assist to turnover stretch was like from the first week of January to like the first week of March. McLaughlin had an assist to turnover ratio of like 58-1. It was just insane. I'm almost positive it was 50 something to 1. Crazy. The on-off numbers this year, the net rating, however you want to slice it, it's incredible. I'll throw a couple of these out there because it's 2 weeks into the season, it was, oh, this is interesting, but we're like, the sample size is getting bigger and bigger. We're like roughly, what is it? This is rough math. We're like about a fifth of the way through the season at this point. Is that right? The Wolves have played 17 games. Oh, more than a fifth, I guess. That would be, just a little over a fifth of the way, a little more than 20% of the way through the season for the Wolves. So it's a sizable sample at this point, more than a month. And the on-off numbers are very stark. Jordan McLaughlin has an on-off number per, and this is a plus minus per 100 possessions is effectively what this is, this net rating, or the on-off, I should say. This is according to Basketball Reference. Jordan McLaughlin has an on-off of plus 20.6. The Wolves are 20 points better, 20 and a half points better with Jordan McLaughlin on the floor per 100 possessions than they are with him off the floor. There are 5 other Timberwolves with positive plus-minus numbers. One of them is Austin Rivers, who's played pretty sparingly. And he's the next closest, by the way. So McLaughlin's a plus 20.6. Austin Rivers is a plus 8.2. You throw him out. Your next closest that actually plays as a regular member of the rotation is Kyle Anderson at a plus 7. And of course, he's missed 5 games due to injury. The only other starters in that category are Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels, incidentally. I shouldn't say other starters. McLaughlin's not a starter. So that's one example. The other one that gets cited all the time is net rating. And like, we could play all sorts of games with this because no matter what lineup McLaughlin's in there with, it's a good lineup. I think this doesn't tell us much other than just how obvious it is that he's playing so well. And of course, this all builds together, right? If you have a great net rating, if you have a great on-off, like all these other, the net rating, all this stuff is going to look really good. All these 2-man, 3-man lineups. But if you take the Timberwolves' most used 2-man lineups and throw out everything that's like 20 minutes or less, right? Actually, even if you don't do that, like we don't even have to do that. We could keep that in there. So go 15 minutes or more for any 2-man lineup that has played 15 or more minutes with the Wolves this year. Jordan McLaughlin's in like 9 of the top 11. So interestingly, D'Angelo Russell, Jordan McLaughlin, they've only played 18 minutes together, but they're a plus 67.5, or excuse me, wrong column, a plus 37.5. Still a really good number in net rating so far this season in 18 minutes. The next lineup is Bryn Forbes and Jordan McLaughlin, only 15 minutes. And then Bryn Forbes and Kyle Anderson, only 15 minutes. But then you go on down the line. These are all now lineups. These next several lineups are all lineups that have played at least 80 minutes together so far this season. So significant sample size. Anthony Edwards, and this is sorted by the Wolves' best 2-man lineups. McLaughlin and Edwards, a plus 25.7. Then McLaughlin and Towns, plus 21.3. And then McLaughlin Anderson, McLaughlin Prince. There's a Jalen Noel, Anthony Edwards in there. That's not random, but just kind of, that's the only non-McLaughlin lineup. Then you go McLaughlin McDaniels. You go on down the line. Jordan McLaughlin. Everybody he's playing with is playing better because they're with Jordan McLaughlin, because he's the straw. He truly is a straw that stirs the drink. It's one of the starkest differences between him and D'Angelo Russell so far this season is consistency, right? Jordan McLaughlin, you know what you're going to get from him. The only thing that hasn't been consistent is the 3-point shot, because he was shooting 12.5% coming into the game on Monday. Then he made 4 to 5 threes, and now he's up around 24%. That's the only thing about him that hasn't been consistent. His defense has been consistently solid. Yes, he's undersized. No, he doesn't rebound, but consistently solid defensively. He makes the right pass on offense. He does not turn the ball over. If we want to compare rate-based stats, advanced metrics between, or not even advanced metrics, but any of the rate-based stats between McLaughlin and D'Angelo Russell, again, a stark difference. McLaughlin has a higher assist rate. He's got a lower turnover rate by 3.1 points. 17% turnover rate for D'Lo, which is really high. 13.9% for J-Mac. A higher steal rate. So higher assist rate, higher steal rate, lower turnover rate. Obviously a lower usage rate than D'Lo. Actually half the usage rate that D'Lo has. A higher 3-point rate. Rebound rates are a little bit lower, but when you're talking about the point guard, that matters a little bit less. Across the board, Jordan McLaughlin has been steadier. He's been more consistent. And he's the type of lower usage guard that a team with so many high usage guys, with an Ant, with a Cat, with, ideally Rudy Gobert getting the ball more. He wants to get the ball more. It makes sense to have a guy who's okay to pass the ball a little bit more. And he's also played a lot with Jalen Noel, which helps in that regard, because Jalen Noel is happy to take those shots. But on down the line, every single one of these stats is a reason why Jordan McLaughlin, or I guess evidence that Jordan McLaughlin has been so good for the Wolves so far this season. And Monday was a perfect microcosm of that. Even though Ant was the flashy moment, the block, the step back 3, Jordan McLaughlin then got the Wolves over the hump on Monday and helped keep them there on Monday. And that's basically what he's done for this team so far this season. All right. Next, I want to get into talking about the issues the Wolves are having specifically and what they need to do to improve and to keep this the good vibes going to this current 4-game winning streak here moving forward. Before we do that, though, let's talk about our friends over at Turo. This episode is brought to you by Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want wherever you want it from a community of local hosts. Browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the US, UK, Canada, and coming soon to Australia. Book a spacious SUV or minivan for a family road trip. Get a classic or luxury car for a special event, birthday, or holiday. Find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just need to get from A to B. You can also test drive that new electric vehicle you had your eye on to see how it fits in your everyday life. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. Thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen today. Now, for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights that only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, let's talk about some of the issues the Wolves are still having, even across this 4-game win streak. Which, like, we don't have to rehash the whole thing. Yes, they played 4 shorthanded opponents, and it is what it is, right? You got to play the teams that are in front of you, and we may look back on this as a stretch of like, hey, it's either one of two things, right? It's either fool's gold because they're beating these shorthanded teams barely, or it's a stretch that's allowing the Wolves to get their feet underneath them, allowing them to becoming more comfortable with who they are as a team, get used to playing with one another, etc. And then moving forward, it's going to serve them well as they start to play better competition. It's going to be one of those two things, right? Across the stretch of 4 straight wins, though, there have been some persistent issues, and I want to focus in specifically on transition defense. And there's a couple of elements that go with this, right? It's multifaceted. It's not just simply like, oh, they're not getting back. I mean, yeah, that's part of it. It's also partly technique. It's also partly personnel. It's partly scheme. It's both rebounding, strategy, and execution. All these things play into transition opportunities for the opposition. I think the best way to look at this is if you go over to NBA.com, you can sort by transition off possessions allowed defensively. And this to me is a really, I think, clear way to look at this. If you look at the number of possessions the Wolves allow per game in transition that are deemed as transition opportunities for the opposing offense, the Wolves have the 4th most defensive possessions per game in transition. They spend the 4th most defensive possessions in transition. They're behind the Rockets, who are atrocious, the Jazz, who are surprisingly very good, but are, the peripherals suggest they might be outperforming what they really are, and I think we all expect them to come back down to earth, and the Lakers, who are also atrocious. The other thing about the Jazz, by the way, so the Wolves are 4th, behind the Rockets, Jazz, and Lakers. What do all those teams have in common? Well, they're poor defensive rebounding teams. The Jazz are actually the league's worst defensive rebound team by rate coming into play on Tuesday this week. So they're 30th in defensive rebound rate. The Wolves are, I believe they're still 27th. I'm going to make sure I have that number right, but I know that they're bottom 5. The Timberwolves are 25th. Yeah, well, there you go. They're up to 25th, which is actually 6th worst. So, good news, right? The Wolves are apparently trending in the right direction there. So the Wolves are 25th in defensive rebound rate. The Jazz are 30th. The Rockets and Lakers are both really bad teams. So the Wolves are in that same group in terms of number of transition opportunities allowed. Now, if you look at points per possession, the Wolves are actually not terrible. You look at free throw frequency and one frequency, any of these other things, overall percentile in terms of points allowed in transition, the Wolves are actually middle of the pack. And that's, I think, mostly due to good fortune and the fact that they still are doing a good job of not fouling. But the good fortune point is the one I want to focus on. The Wolves have had some bad luck early in the season with opponents just making open threes, the Wolves missing open threes. I do think some of that's already starting to even out. In transition, the Wolves are still allowing far too many opportunities, and opposing teams aren't cashing in even as much as they probably could be against the Wolves. And that's why this is still a danger zone thing for me in my mind related to the Wolves. At halftime of the Wolves Heat game on Monday, Miami was outscoring the Wolves 17-2 in transition, which is absurd. The Heat don't even play fast. We talked about this in the pregame show, the preview on Monday. The Heat were one of the league's slowest teams in terms of pace. They're happy to plod up and down the court. But the Wolves instead, and I said one of the keys to the game was like, the Heat don't really want to run, but they will if you allow them to. They're a smart team. Any NBA team is going to run, and if you give them the chance. The Wolves were so bad on the defensive glass and getting back in transition that Miami racked up almost 20 transition points on them in the first half of the game, 20 fast break points to the Wolves too. The Wolves are allowing too many of these transition fast break opportunities. Part of it is because they're allowing so many open threes, long rebounds lead to breakouts, fast break opportunities. The bad defensive rebounding is probably the biggest issue. And then simply getting back and also getting back and communicating, right? Saying I've got ball or you get back, I'll take this wing or whatever. Like lane integrity when you're spacing, defensive spacing, if that makes sense, right? Like we always talk about spacing on offense in transition and filling the lane and not having guys too clustered together in the middle of the floor. It's kind of the same thing defensively. Like you need to have your head on a swivel. Obviously, stopping the ball is the most important thing, but knowing where the opposing players are in transition without the ball. So getting back and defensive rebounding, I think, are the two biggest things, but also technique. And again, because they're mostly defending without fouling in terms of free throw rate, the free throw rate is still okay. The opponent free throw rate for the Wolves, they've lucked out a little bit. Like it could be worse. The points per possession in transition could absolutely be worse, but they're better than all those teams ahead of them, as well as many others. They're actually very middle of the pack in terms of points per possession, overall percentile, free throw rate, all that stuff in transition, or free throw percentage or free throw frequency. Yeah, free throw rate for the opponent offense. Again, a lot of good fortune there. The Wolves need to get better at getting back in defense or getting back defensively in the open floor, because I think they've gotten a little bit lucky to this point, and that's not going to get better. It's going to get worse before it gets better if they don't hustle defensively. Again, a positive that they're not fouling a ton in transition. That's a good thing. But I don't know that that's going to last either. So that's the biggest thing for me. And again, it goes hand in hand with defensive rebound rate, which has improved a little bit, up to 25th in the league, 25th percentile. A week ago, we spent a lot of time about this, actually before the win streak, and talked a lot about how it was the no man's land rebounds. It was the guards and wings not pulling their weight on the defensive glass. And I think the Wolves have kind of shored up those areas a little bit. We're seeing Jaden McDaniels at least become a little bit more active on the glass. Still, rebound rate is lower than where it should be, but it's much higher than it was a week ago. He's been much better on the glass of late. Taurean Prince has mixed it up a bit. He had to play some 4 in the absence of Kyle Anderson against the Heat the other night. Anthony Edwards, I've criticized him for his lack of rebounding, and it was actually an issue on Monday against Miami on a couple of big possessions where he simply here's the thing. NBA teams don't box out consistently. They just don't. And, I'm not going to get off my lawn about it get off my lawn about it, act that way, because it's tiresome when people do that, but they just don't. Like, yes, the best rebounders do, your Rudy Gobert's does often, your Kevin Loves, guys that are just like genuinely solid rebounders. They use proper technique. Yes, that's a thing. Guys do it. Many guys don't, especially guards, especially wings, guys that are athletic and young and big for their position, like Anthony Edwards, that don't think they need to. And it becomes an issue. I'm not even asking him to straight box guys out. Just be physical and put your body into somebody or get in the way of somebody or beat somebody to a loose ball. There were multiple loose balls on, that turned into usually offensive rebound opportunities or offensive rebound, second chance opportunities for the Heat, where Anthony Edwards just wasn't around the ball. He didn't have that burst going towards the ball to be active and be involved. It was almost disinterest. Now, since we talked a lot about that last week, the Cleveland game was a big issue. He had Edwards had 8 rebounds in the win against Orlando. He had 5 in the win against Philly, and he had 7 in the win against Miami. If he's in that 5 to 7 rebound range, that's a pretty good place for him. If he can average, call it 6 rebounds a game, right? That's a pretty arbitrary number. I get that, but like not a bad target. The rebound rate itself just needs to tick upwards. He's never averaged more than 5 rebounds per game in the NBA. He's 5.8 rebounds per game so far this season. And to this point, rebound rate is a better way to read that, accounting for number of possessions. The rebound rate right now is at a career high, but it has to stay there for Ant if the Wolves are going to be competitive on the defensive glass this season. All right, I want to close with a preview of Wolves-Pacers. I like I said off the top, I think this is an intriguing matchup, so we're going to do that here next. First, though, today's episode is brought to us by our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From football to basketball to soccer and esports, they've got it all at betonline.net. And this week is such a fun time to be over there. Of course, Wednesday night basketball, Thanksgiving Eve, everyone's celebrating Thanksgiving Thursday. So stay up and watch all the games Wednesday. Get involved at BetOnline. And then Thursday, get up and you have, I think it's a triple header of NFL games. It typically is on Thanksgiving. No NBA, but then you got NBA Friday. It's a huge weekend of sports, college football Saturday, NFL again Sunday, NBA throughout the weekend. Those are my favorite two things to bet over at BetOnline. So be sure to check all those sports out at BetOnline. If you love sports podcasts, you can also find those at BetOnline as well. They're the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Wolves-Pacers on Wednesday. So I circled this game like a week ago, or I shouldn't say circled, but I looked at this game, and actually Marnie Gellner and I talked about this on the live postcast, I think after the Cavs game a week and a half ago, the first game of this, mini 4-game winning streak, as like, hey, this is going to get a little easier. You get Indiana, you get Charlotte. There's a couple other winnable games here in the near future for the Wolves. And then since then, the Pacers just keep winning. They've actually won 5 in a row. The Pacers and Kings, I think, are now up to 6 in a row after winning on Monday, are the only teams with longer winning streaks in the NBA right now, by the way, than the Wolves, who have won 4 straight. But the Pacers have rattled off 5 straight wins. They're now 10-6. When I started thinking about this, they were kind of hovering around the 500 mark. Now, we look at who they've beaten, and it's not exactly a murderer's row of opponents. They beat the Raptors, which is nice. They won at Charlotte and at Houston, 2 of the league's worst teams. Then they beat Orlando twice, another bad team. So they've beaten up on mostly bad teams. It's going to get tougher for them soon. They play the Wolves, they play the Nets, they play the Clippers, they play the Jazz. So a lot of tough games upcoming for the Pacers. But all that to say, they're mostly healthy. They've got a couple rotation guys. Really just one main rotation guy that they're missing, and that's Chris Duarte got hurt about a week ago or so, or a couple weeks ago, and is out with a sprained ankle. But besides him, you're mostly looking at a healthy team. Obviously, there's big shakeup. They had a big shakeup there. Miles Turner's still there. There's rumors about his potential availability. They acquired Jalen Smith, which was a nice acquisition. Aaron Nesmith is another one. The rookie Benedict Mathurin is a ton of fun. I loved him doing my draft research, pre-draft. They traded for Halliburton last year. I've always loved Halliburton. I liked him a lot going back to the 2020 draft, that was the Ant draft. And I loved him as a prospect, or I may be a year off on that. Was it the Ant draft or was it the year before? Was it the 19 or 20? Let's see. It was 2020. I was right. I psyched myself out. It was the Ant draft. Anyway, I liked him as a prospect a lot. He was good in Sacramento. He's been fantastic thus far in Indiana. He's actually averaging a double-double, almost 20 and 11, 20.4 points, 10.7 assists per game. He's shooting just a hair under 40% from 3 on 7.1 attempts from 3 per game. But at any rate, in doing my research for this matchup, I found an article about how the Pacers were defending high usage, all-star caliber ball handlers and scorers, perimeter players earlier this season. This was from about 2 weeks ago over at indiecornrows.com. And this is written by C. Cooper, who that's the name of the author on the page, but clicking through, her name is Caitlin Cooper if you go to her Twitter. And just a fantastic article about how the Pacers play help defense and some of the issues earlier this season and how they potentially could correct them. The way that they defended early in the year, so this was, again, the beginning of November, so a couple weeks ago, James Harden, Kevin Durant, and Bradley Beal, was they essentially had the help defender basically hang out at the nail. So like, for instance, if the Wolves example would be if Anthony Edwards has the ball in isolation on like the right, the right side wing, the right wing, then the help defender would kind of linger at the nail, which is the middle of the free throw line, the center of the court, and essentially shadow the ball handler and dare them to swing the ball. Now, that didn't work great against guys that are willing passers. James Harden's a good example. Kevin Durant's another one. If you kick the ball to a teammate that's going to knock down an open three, you can beat that sort of defense. If you load up and force the pass, fine, but you're forcing the ball out of the scorer's hands, and then they've got to make the shot. Against the Wolves, you better believe the Pacers are going to do something similar, because against Anthony Edwards, that's not all too different from what Memphis did to him or tried to do to him in the playoffs. So what teams have really, when he gets hot, they try and load up on him. Generally, they dare him to shoot a three, because teams would rather Ant shoot a three than come at them downhill. Although it depends on the night, right? Because some nights Ant just doesn't get calls and that consumes him, but yet he can knock down threes like he ended up doing against the Heat on Monday. But you can bet the Pacers are going to put a defender at the nail and dare Ant to drive directly into a double team. And if he doesn't, he should be able to swing the ball to the opposite side. And the Wolves would do well to have, whether it's D'Lo or maybe it's Cat in the opposite slot, to swing the ball and have a plus shooter on the perimeter open and available to catch and shoot and hurt the defense. Or maybe it's a pump fake drive, kick the ball back out, and you really get a nice driving kick thing going. We saw the Heat, and before them, who was the team the other night that used the Sixers last Saturday, did an outstanding job mixing in zone and really challenging the Timberwolves. And the Wolves finally, like third quarter of the Heat game, figured out like, hey, we could beat the zone with Chris passing and making open jumpers. Who knew? That's like, I talked about this on the show Tuesday. That's how you beat a zone. That's why NBA teams can only play a zone, 5% of possessions over the course of a game, is because good passing and good shooting beats a zone. These guys should all be good passers and good shooters. They're in the NBA, for crying out loud, right? So the Pacers will probably mix in some zone, but if they essentially use this help defender kind of lingering and forcing Edwards to make a decision with the ball in his hands, if Edwards makes the right decisions, this is a matchup the Wolves should be able to exploit, right? The Pacers aren't an outstanding defensive team. They're okay. Right now, defensive rating wise, they're 16. That's been buoyed a little bit by playing the Magic twice in a row and, some of these other matchups they've had. But the Pacers will deploy a similar defensive strategy against the Wolves, no doubt. They'll have somebody at the nail. They'll try and force Ant to make decisions. And, hopefully he makes the right ones and the Wolves can put the ball in the basket and be efficient offensively and avoid turnovers. The Pacers as a team don't turn opponents over all that often. Well, actually, they're kind of middle of the pack. They're 14th in turnover rate, and that's a way that they can do that, right? How many times have we seen Ant make a lazy left-handed, one-handed pass to try and swing the ball, and somebody pops out and deflects it and goes back the other way in a fast break? That's exactly what the Pacers are going to be looking for, either that or drive into a double team in the middle of the floor. That's what Indiana is trying to generate in this game. Overall, again, middle of the pack defense. Offensively, the Pacers are 5th in pace, so they do like to play fast. They're 4th in three-point attempt rate. They shoot a lot of threes, and they're 11th in percentage. They make a bunch of them. Halliburton's obviously fantastic. Buddy Hield, haven't talked about him yet. He's 38% from three on 10 attempts per game, so massive volume. Mathurin off the bench. He's come off the bench in all 16 games, and the rookie is averaging 19 points per game on 42% shooting from three. That's 6 attempts per game, 42% shooting. And, a handful of other guys that are strong three-point shooters, solid to strong three-point shooters. Basically, everyone on this roster that plays is a willing and mostly capable three-point shooter. It's a deep roster. They play a lot of guys that are effective. And again, they beat up on some bad teams lately and have some confidence coming into, hosting Minnesota. This is game 3 of a 4-game homestand for the Pacers. So those things are all notable. Also related to the Pacers defense, they do foul quite a bit, which is, one of the things the Wolves could try and exploit. They're actually 30th in free throw attempt rate defensively. So they give up essentially 0.25 free throws per field goal attempt. So another way of saying that is for every 4 shots the opponent attempts, they give up a single free throw, which is insane. So the Wolves have kind of been all over the map in terms of generating free throw attempts for themselves. Rudy Gobert didn't have any until the final 2 minutes the other night. Ant only had one free throw attempt, and it was a technical. He didn't generate and only any of his own free throw attempts. So the Wolves need to kind of dial that up a little bit against this Pacers team. My keys here are like, hey, get to the foul line against a team that commits a lot of fouls. Ant needs to be aggressive. Cat needs to be aggressive. D'Lo needs to be aggressive. Yeah, I know that's tough for him sometimes, going to the rim frequently, but just if they get the Pacers in the bonus, in the penalty, try the rip through move on the perimeter. Do that, do the thing we saw you do a bunch last year, D'Lo, to get to the line a couple times a game on the rip through move when you're in the bonus. Whatever you got to do, you need to pick up some of those easy buckets. Get back in transition. This is a team that likes to play fast. They're going to look for those trail threes in transition, those pull-up threes as well. And the Wolves should have, if they play hard and get back in transition, they should be able to limit those opportunities for the Pacers. And those two things together are not a bad recipe to beat this Pacers team. Again, I know they won 5 straight, but they've also lost to the Wizards and the Spurs, earlier this season. Like they're 10-6, but it's a relatively soft 10-6. They've had some good fortune. They've had a great schedule lately. So an opportunity for the Wolves to beat, to win their own, to have their own 5-game winning streak and beat a solid team that's feeling good themselves. A win over the Pacers heading into Charlotte on Friday night would feel really good for Minnesota. So here's hoping that happens. Of course, we'll go live with Marnie Gellner, Bally Sports North, about 45 minutes following the conclusion. It's an early 6 p.m. tip, of course, because they're in Indiana on Wednesday. So we'll go live, call it 9:15 or so Central on Wednesday evening, myself and Marnie. We will have a post-game podcast that'll post early Thanksgiving morning, so go ahead and listen to that before, during, after the Macy's parade or whatever it is you choose to watch on Thanksgiving morning before you watch football. And we'll also cover the Friday game as well. We will have a Friday episode. I said earlier this week we wouldn't. We will have an episode on Friday to preview Wolves Hornets on Friday and anything else notable coming out of Wednesday's game against the Pacers. So shows as normal throughout this week, as well as live postcasts. A big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, it's free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, and on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. For your second listen, you could go check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.